Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no.
Amateur Traveler, episode 648. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about caverns, a petrified forest, and diners, wigwam motels, the Disney movie Cars, and the world's second largest rocking chair as we take Route 66, the Mother Road. Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. Let's talk about an iconic U.S. road trip. I'd like to welcome to the show Austin Coop from the twolaneamerica.com travel blog, and that's 2 with the number 2, and guidedroute66tours.com. And strangely enough, I wanted to mention that second one because that's exactly what we're going to talk about, a road trip on Route 66. Austin, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
And we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about the itinerary because the itinerary was laid down by somebody, and I said the 1950s before we started recording, and I'm wrong. When was Route 66 in the U.S. laid out?
Well, this is a topic in itself. There's actually multiple alignments of Route 66. Every now and then somebody tells me, why would I need help going down one road? Well, because there's 3 of them. So if you imagine Route 66, it changed the same way America changed. Okay. So when it was first laid out, platted out, you had some of your roads were already in existence, especially through states like Illinois. They became the favorite highways of your bootleggers and illegal moonshine.
So we're in the 1920s then at that point.
And then piece by piece, they started assembling it together. And then eventually there were official designations and things like that. It was originally supposed to be Route 60. Another part of the country already claimed that. So supposedly in Springfield, Missouri is where they got the first postmark that shows anybody referring to it as 66. But again, you get the multiple variations over time. As your cars got bigger, they got faster, and the number of people on the roads changed dramatically, obviously, with the heyday really being obviously the 1950s.
Excellent. And so we're talking about a route, a sort of legendary, iconic Americana road trip from, and I'm going to say Chicago to Santa Monica, California. Am I close?
Yeah, that's most commonly how we think of it, from right downtown Chicago, right there by the Art Museum, all the way down to the Santa Monica Pier. Now, of course, that being said, depending on the variation, originally it stopped in downtown LA, later extended over to the ocean. But for most people, we think of downtown Chicago as the start of the trail, and the Santa Monica Pier is the end of the trail.
Well, and I know when I was in Albuquerque, they were pointing out the different routes that it had taken through town. So at one point in Albuquerque, Route 66 crosses Route 66, which gets very confusing because they had changed the route at some point. So, yeah, I feel a little familiar with that. And for those who did not grow up in the U.S. and those who are not of the age that I am who grew up in the U.S., you may not remember that there used to be a TV show, actually, that was Route 66 of these two young guys. I don't remember what convertible it was that would drive through America and interact with people along Route 66 as they made their way week by week across the country. I don't know if they were actually making any progress. I don't remember the show in that detail, but
yeah, they had vintage Corvettes, early generation Corvettes.
I was going to guess it was a Corvette, but I wasn't sure. And which seems like the ideal car to drive, Route 66, but
oh yeah.
Excellent. Well, why are we talking about Route 66? Let's do that.
Route 66 lost its designation as a federal highway back in the 80s, I do believe, maybe even earlier. It kind of hit hard times. A lot of the towns that were along Route 66 languished during the 80s and early 90s. But something interesting happened, and there's a lot of different reasons for this, a lot of really cool stories related to people, but we're now seeing it's never been more popular. And lots of things play into that. First of all, you've got the demographic that remembers traveling it or remembers going on it maybe as a young child, things like that. Now, as they're retiring, they want to go back and they want to do that again. So you've got one bucket of travelers that are just nostalgic. And then you've got a whole nother set of travelers. A lot of international travelers are associating it with America and the wide open spaces of America. And then you've got even people just from the movie Cars.
I was going to say that's the other more recent reference to Route 66, sure.
And the producers of Cars went to great lengths, Lasseter and the other Pixar Disney guys, to make sure that stuff in that movie matched up with real life people and places. So almost every little bit of that movie has some sort of very tangible connection to real life.
Excellent. Well, it's on my bucket list, this drive, and it's a drive. Let's count the states here: Illinois, Missouri, Oklahoma, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California.
You forgot Kansas.
I wasn't sure if it... I was looking at the map going, and does it hit Kansas? Okay.
Just barely. It just barely lops off kind of a corner of Kansas.
All right.
So you get 8 states in there.
Excellent. And do we want to drive west to east or east to west?
Theoretically, it makes no difference. But I don't know if it's just because of the song. It just seems like it's ingrained in our psyche to go Chicago to LA.
It is.
There's lots of reasons for that. Obviously, the song, Get Your Kicks on Route 66, is a big part of that. But then also, even going back further, Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. That's where it originally gets its name, the Mother Road.
Oh.
As it talked about these families enduring the Dust Bowl, just horrible conditions, traveling Route 66 to head out west to California, which was their promised land. So that's where we get the moniker, the Mother Road.
Oh, I did not realize it was connected. I just actually read that book for the first time last year. Excellent book, lousy ending, but yeah. And the song that you're referring to, Get Your Kicks on Route 66, is by Nat King Cole, so no slouch there.
I could be wrong. I think Bobby Troop, however you want to say it, wrote it. But you're definitely right. Nat King Cole, and then the Chuck Berry version, and then
Nelson
even
Riddle. Neither one of us was right.
Really?
Okay.
Oh, okay. Good to know.
Excellent. And where would you recommend we stop along Route 66?
The cool thing about Route 66 is so much of it is accessible right off of the major interstates. So let's say you were going from the Midwest out west, or from the west back towards the east, and you were hard pressed for time. Okay, let's say you've got no big deal, but if you've ever traveled along I-40, it's miserable. It's just nothing upon nothing upon nothing. But what people don't realize is that most of the time, they're literally minutes away from some of the best roadside attractions in the United States. So I tell people if you're traveling in a hurry, there's lots of ways to do Route 66. And then, of course, if you really want the experience, you need about 2 weeks, in my opinion, to get a real taste of it. That being said, there's something in every state that is remarkable to me. Some of the stuff would appeal to all of us, things like the Gateway Arch in St. Louis, the Oklahoma City Memorial, which is one of the most powerful places. I put it up there, top 5, with things like Ground Zero and the Holocaust Museum. I mean, it's so well done. It's just remarkable.
And that's a series of empty chairs that recall the children killed in this domestic terrorism attack in the 80s?
Mid-90s, yes. Oklahoma City bombing. The actual site of the building is where they've laid out these empty chairs. They've got a chair for every victim, and the chairs are located where those people were within the office building. And you mentioned that the children, they have smaller chairs for the kids. Okay. And I mean, the accompanying museum, it's one of those I tell everybody, go through it at your own pace and you'll be amazed. It's silent. Nobody talks because everyone is just on edge. It's so well done. It's so powerful. They take you all the way. They've got the car that they caught McVeigh driving. So they go everything from the minute before all the way up to the eventual to today, where the way it ends is really cool too. They could have ended that in a dark place. Instead, they end it with an interactive experience, especially aimed towards school children, where they can talk about hope for peace and hope for understanding. It's just honestly one of the best experiences anywhere in the United States.
And I didn't mean to start us in the middle. Why don't we jump back to Chicago and start doing the places that you want to suggest we stop in order east to west?
Illinois, I think a lot of is underrated. I think some of your most fun places along Route 66 are in Illinois. It's not going to be the most glamorous scenery. It's the Midwest. I'm from the Midwest. It's not a knock. We're just a little flat out here. In the midst of these cornfields, there's stuff in Chicago, places like Lou Mitchell's where you want to grab breakfast, stuff like that. But really, once you get out of Chicago, the town of Joliet, you can stop by the old prison there. That's the prison from Blues Brothers that they break out of. They're in the process of turning that into some sort of museum experience. But then as you get a little bit further down the road, you start to come to some of my favorite places. Dwight and Odell are both just little towns that have vintage filling stations that have been restored to how they would have looked back in the earlier days of Route 66.
Now, when you pull in, do people run outside to check your oil and fill you up?
They do not, but I guarantee if you needed it, somebody would.
Okay.
These are the kind of places where it's just amazing. We'll talk about this more as we get into this, but the people are just as important as the places, which is what makes this a unique road trip.
Well, and before we go too far, I realize we left out something for people who don't know the story, and we do have people who are listening internationally who wouldn't necessarily. If you've seen cars, you've picked up on this already, that one of the big changes between Route 66 and the interstates that largely replaced it in terms of holding all the traffic was that the interstates, they wanted to get you there quickly, and so they stopped going through the little towns and bypassing them. As you said, maybe just a couple miles away, but with the Route 66, you ended up at the stoplight on Main Street, which is a different experience and a slower experience. Now all the business went from Main Street to whatever filling station happened to be at the exit of the interstate, and so a lot of these towns did start to lose that business and somewhat decay in places. So it's nice to hear places like Dwight, you're saying, restoring some of that vintage architecture and experience.
Go ahead and just talk about it now, even though it's way out in Arizona. We really credit.
You're going to do what I'm doing.
Well, if we're doing the backstory, I've got to tell you about the man we call the Angel of the Route.
Okay.
So it's a barber named Angel out in this little town called Seligman, Arizona. He'd been a barber there his whole life. His brother ran the little drive-in there in town. His whole family was there. After the interstate passed them by, after I-40 went by him there, the town was so poor that it couldn't turn its streetlights on. And he literally watched from the window of his Route 66 barbershop. He watched everything die. And he was forced with a decision. Do I uproot my entire family from the place that we've called home? Or do I do something about it? And he did something about it. He formed the very first Route 66 Association. And he told everyone, he said, people will come back if we make this a tourist destination. And he was right. So he showed everybody else how to do it. And we call him the angel of the route. He's in his 90s now. His barbershop is more of a gift shop now. He's credited largely with being a big reason that Route 66 is again thriving. He was one of the main consultants on the movie Cars. So for me, that's the backstory of how it came to be a thing again, is they knew that people would want to, just as the movie says, instead of driving to make great time, they drove to have a great time. So it really was that in real life. So yeah, back in Illinois, one of my favorite towns is a town called Pontiac, Illinois, small city actually. So Pontiac has a few different unique things. First, they have the Illinois Route 66 Museum and Hall of Fame. And inside there, you'll find a Volkswagen microbus that belonged to a guy named Bob Waldmeyer. And he was the inspiration for Fillmore in the movie Cars.
Okay.
And he was a true life, I don't want to say hippie, but he lived on the road most of his life. He really did. Spent most of his life going around doing art. His art still lives on all over Route 66. But in addition to that, you'll find lots of different things in just this one little town. The Pontiac Oakland Packard Car Museum is there in Pontiac, which is interesting. You know, the Pontiac wasn't made in Illinois. It was made in Michigan.
Right.
And when Pontiac went to the graveyard there, they basically convinced this prolific Pontiac collector and expert to put his museum right there in Pontiac, Illinois. So it becomes a great stop for people like me that are into cars, but just really anybody. They've also got a wonderful war museum. It's an easy place to spend an hour or two. From there, we go to my next favorite town, which is the town of Atlanta. So Atlanta, Illinois, population, if it's 1,000 people, I'd be amazed. My friends there in town always give me the exact population by the person every time I stop. But there you'll find a great vintage diner that's been restored just as it was in the 40s and 50s. And this little diner was everything from where they had their school dances to where the Greyhound bus picked up. Just the most charming little town. They've also got an arcade museum full of vintage arcade games. And then they've got one of your giant muffler men, giant roadside.
Oh, sure, yeah.
This particular one is holding a hot dog. It's actually at a hot dog shop outside Chicago. So Atlanta, Illinois is just another example of these little towns that are just right off the highway that are just great places for lunch or dinner that you would just never know are there unless you get off the highway.
Excellent.
Ah bon chien. Bonjour, je suis Theo, a tour leader with Explore, and this is Punti. He's helping us find truffles under the trees next to this beautiful vineyard. Maybe for tomorrow's cooking class? Oui, call is 7 heures. Parfait. 7 o'clock. Not everyone gets to enjoy a Bordeaux sunset this way, but you will if you explore. No, Punti. Search exploreworldwide.com and don't just travel. Explore.
Moving a little quicker, you've got Springfield, Illinois, which is, of course, the capital.
Mm-hmm.
There you can go to Lincoln's home. So the only house that he ever actually owned is there in Springfield.
Hmm.
And you can also go to his tomb, which is a really meaningful experience to go to his memorial and resting place there. You can also stop by places like the Cozy Dog, which is where the corn dog was invented.
All right.
There's no shortage of places to eat. There's a maple syrup place called Funk's Grove if you happen to be there during the maple syrup season. All sorts of other fun stuff. But then eventually you're going to make it to St. Louis. So you're going to cross the mighty Mississippi. And then in St. Louis there's obviously lots to do and see, highlighted by the Gateway Arch. You know, if you've never been up in the arch,
Right.
It's an experience. Just riding the little capsules to get to the top is an unforgettable experience. And all your fun stuff, you know, Anheuser-Busch and the Cathedral Basilica, and just your normal city tourism things there in St. Louis.
Okay.
From there, you start to get into the Missouri part, Merrimack Caverns, which Merrimack Caverns is just a cave system, and they've got a real nice tour there, a little over an hour. Not too intense. It's accessible, so anybody can do it. They've got a great light show at the end of it. The story of the caverns, supposedly Jesse James and his gang hid out there. I'll just put it this way. The guy that owned it in the first part of the 20th century there was a master showman. And so
You're doubting some of the historical accuracy is what I'm hearing here.
some of it's a wink and a nod.
Okay.
But it's a great cave tour. From there, I always eat lunch in Cuba, Missouri, which has a vintage filling station where everybody in the little town, if you were growing up, you were a 16-year-old boy, that was typically your first job, was working at this filling station.
Uh-huh.
This family has converted it into a remarkable restaurant. And I don't mean just like diner food. Her son, the owner's son, is the head chef. And for his age, he's remarkable. So I like to stop there for lunch. It's also a town with a bunch of murals, so you can go get some photos of the murals. And then just up the road a little bit there is a Wagon Wheel Motel, which is one of the earliest hotels on Route 66. They have, again, restored it and updated it, so they've got a great little gift shop. And then it's on to Fanning, which used to be the world's largest rocking chair. I believe they have lost that title.
There's competition for the world's largest
There is
rocking chair.
competition. Now they call it the largest one on Route 66, which that is definitely true. Route 66 is a series of just little fun, quirky stops like that. It's a vintage motel here. It's a roadside attraction like a Muffler Man. It's the world's largest rocking chair, formerly. It's just a series of little kitschy, fun stops like that. It just really never ends. Start to get into Kansas and just a little bit of stuff to do there in Kansas. There's a couple towns with, again, old filling stations that have been restored and things like that. Get into Oklahoma, where you get a few different things. If you're a baseball fan, you know that Mickey Mantle is from Oklahoma. He's from what we would call Miami, the Miami Commerce area. You can actually go to his boyhood home. There's space there. If you bring a baseball glove, you can have a little catch right there in his yard. Then you go to the town of Miami there, and it's spelled Miami,
right?
But it's actually Miami. It's tribal land for the most part. They've got an old theater there that a man built after he made a fortune with lead mining, and it's of course haunted like every old theater. And so you can tour that, and then eventually you're going to make it to Claremore, where the Will Rogers Museum is. Mm-hmm. And now Will Rogers was well beyond our time. I never realized how famous he was until I went to that museum.
Oh, yeah.
I never realized it. And I remember going there in college, and none of us were like, why are we here? Is that the guy with the horse? Like, no, that was Roy Rogers. Well, who's Will Rogers? Like, what are we doing here?
Right. Humorist.
It was amazing. Just amazing. And, from there, you've got fun stuff like the Blue Whale of Catoosa, which is always featured in photos of Route 66, where it's just this funky giant whale that this guy made. He was actually the Tulsa zookeeper, and he decided he wanted to make his wife something for their anniversary, and it got out of hand and ended up a giant blue whale. Down the road a little bit more, you've got the round barn, which is you don't see a whole lot of those round barns anymore. Mm-hmm. You've got the world's largest pop bottle outside of a pop soda ranch. There's just no shortage of stuff. Eventually, you again roll into Oklahoma City, and we already talked about the Oklahoma City Memorial. And then I always take people to the State House. Mm-hmm. It's been my experience. You can never go wrong going to a State House. As you go further into Oklahoma, you get the Oklahoma Route 66 Museum, which really tells the story, chronological detail of the different types of travelers you had. About early on, you had the Dust Bowl travelers, right. And then you had a lot of GIs on their way to war that utilized Route 66. And then you even come to the little town of Eric, Oklahoma, which, if you're a fan of Roger Miller, King of the Road,
sure,
that's where he grew up. And Sheb Wooley from the Purple People Eater, they both come from this one light town. I mean, it's amazing that both of those men came from that town. And then you go to Texola, which, depending on which year it is, they'll tell you it's in Texas or Oklahoma.
Depending on which year it is.
Heaven forbid we agree on any sort of boundary line. So it depends who the surveyor is. Every so often, they'll do a new survey and they'll place Texola more in Texas, and other times they'll place it more in Oklahoma. It's just right on the border there, and then you cross into Texas. Most of Route 66 in Texas is now a frontage road.
Okay.
But Shamrock is the town that most people are going to stop at. Shamrock has the U-Drop Inn, which is the inspiration for Ramones in the movie Cars. It's this beautiful Art Deco architecture. Stunning if you ever go through there at night. Stunning neon. The neon was actually, it took them years to raise the money to replace the neon, get it all working again. A big storm knocked it all back out. So they actually replaced it with LEDs that are now shatterproof, which was a great move. They've actually got a booth in there that Elvis sat at when he was passing through town.
Well, and I feel like it looks like something I've sat in Cars Land in California Adventure too. I mean, it's
probably, yeah. Anybody that's seen the movie, it's so recognizable. They were genius at their little gift shop there. They've got an entire section of Cars stuff for the kids. So they were really smart there. But Shamrock, it has a Blarney Stone, like a real Blarney Stone.
Okay.
The way they got it is absurd. They convinced, this was during Route 66's heyday, so they had a little bit of clout here. They convinced Ireland that they would promote tourism, since their name was Shamrock, Texas.
Okay.
They would promote tourism if, in exchange, they got a real Blarney Stone.
Okay, so a real piece of the castle, the
Yes.
Blarney Castle. Okay.
So, and legend says if you kiss it, you get the gift of gab. So, I don't know how often they clean it, so you're going to get a gift of something.
Now, you said that in Texas, Route 66 is a frontage road. Does that imply that beforehand we have been on a separate road, or have we actually been on the interstate that now goes on that route?
And I could be wrong about this, but my understanding is that when they did the interstate, a lot of the original Route 66 was destroyed.
Okay.
About 80% of the original route remains, okay? But I do believe, from what I've always read, is that a lot of it that was destroyed in Texas.
Okay.
So what you see in some cases is they take a frontage road and they basically call it Route 66. That's the way most of Amarillo is.
Got it. Okay.
Which, of course, Amarillo, on the way there, you want to stop in Groom, Texas, and see the world's largest balls of barbed wire and the Barbed Wire Museum. And then they've got the giant cross in Groom. And then in Amarillo, of course, you want to go to the big Texan steak ranch, where if you can eat a tremendous amount of steak and other items, you get it for free. So they've been featured on every TV show, and they're pretty well known. But of course, on the way out of Amarillo, you come to Cadillac Ranch, which Cadillac Ranch is a perfect example of one that if you're just on the highway, you can see it from the highway. All you have to do is get off on the exit. And if you brought spray paint, great. If not, there's typically some leftover spray paint out there. You
have to describe for the people who are listening, who aren't looking at the photo, which is now on the iTunes Enhanced version, what the hell you're talking about. Because there's no way that people are going to go Cadillac Ranch and automatically picture what you're seeing.
So Cadillac Ranch is consistently considered one of the top roadside attractions in the United States. It's basically a bunch of Cadillacs that have been buried with their nose down in the dirt.
Right.
So just their tails stick up in the air, which supposedly the angle that they're sticking up at is the same angle as the pyramids in Egypt. But the whole thing is just an art, it's just a funky art installation. And they encourage you to spray paint them. And they encourage you to obviously pick up your trash. But at the same time, you're encouraged to spray paint your name or your significant other's name. And every so often they'll come through and just paint all of them a solid color and give everybody a blank canvas again. And that lasts a couple hours. It's up there with Car Hinge, I'd say, are the two most well-known kind of roadside attractions of the West. But it's featured in the movie Cars as well. There's a Cadillac Ranch mountain range in the movie where it's got all but yeah, just stuff like that. You don't need to bring your own spray paint. When I do trips out there, I bring some. but there's typically some leftover spray paint. But you might want to grab some stuff to clean up with afterwards, because it's the Texas plains and it gets windy. And I've had more than one person show up with paint all over their hands and face. So just keep that in mind. From there, you're off towards Adrian, Texas, which is the midpoint, which is a little over 1,000 miles, something like 1,100 and some. Actually, 1,200. I'd have to look at the math, but Route 66 is about 2,400 miles. Right there, you'll find a little flower shop, and you'll find Fran Hauser inside working that shop with her trusty dog. And Fran actually is the inspiration for the character Flo in the movie. So she's Flo. And she's got little postcards with the car on it that she'll give to everybody. And then next door is the Midpoint Cafe, which has some of the best cinnamon rolls you'll ever eat, as well as a gift shop. There's always a gift shop, if never fail. But from there you go towards Tucumcari, which has been featured in so many songs. It's kind of an anomaly. But that's where you're going to find a lot of your vintage motels that you see featured, the Blue Swallow, Motel Safari, and then also TP Curio. I should also mention Roadrunner Lodge. It's kind of neat. All of these people have been coming back to Tucumcari and one by one purchasing these old vintage motels and just turning them into wonderful places to stay. The Roadrunner, I can't say enough good things about the Brenners. Motel Safari has been beautifully renovated, and Blue Swallow, especially their neon sign, is incredibly famous for anybody that's a hardcore road tripper. And TP Curio is technically the last original curio shop that's still on Route 66. Again, looks like a teepee. I mean, everything has had to come up with ways to pull you in when you were driving down the road back then. So they got really creative with it. And we just don't see that when we're driving along the highway as much anymore.
Well, and that one should not be confused with the Teepee Motel. This is a curio shop, but I think that's actually on Route 66 also, isn't it?
Yeah, so we're almost to those.
Okay, yeah.
But yeah, it goes on and on. You know, Albuquerque, you've got the 66 Diner, the Standard Diner. You can justify a side trip up to Santa Fe because the early route did go up through
to Santa Fe.
It did.
Yeah, Santa Fe lost out when they took a bend out of the road at some point. Lost all the traffic.
Yep. I think Santa Fe did okay. What do you think? You could easily time this with Balloon Fiesta in Albuquerque, which is spectacular.
It is indeed. And we have a whole episode on Balloon Fiesta on Albuquerque as well. So
it's well worth a listen because it's absolutely worth going to.
Oh, absolutely. It's a bucket list item.
It is. Heading out of Albuquerque, you start to get towards, the El Rancho Motel in Gallup. That's where all your movie stars stayed when they were filming Westerns out west. And you can go in there, and they've, of course, got a gift shop. You've got Petrified Forest National Park, which is one of the most underrated national parks. It's the only national park that Route 66 ever did go through. And they've got an old, I believe, Studebaker that they've allowed to rust out by where the road used to be. What's also cool is we start to get into the area where the Harvey company really started to get big.
Okay.
And so there's a lot of cool stuff. There's one of the original, what they call Harvey houses.
Now, I'm going to guess that a lot of people haven't, there's a book about the Harvey company that came out within the last decade, but a lot of people probably don't know who you're talking about.
To make a long story short, Harvey basically was kind of disgusted with what was available in terms of food and beverage while traveling by train. What would happen is the train would stop into a town there, and the town knew that they were the only people got to eat. So they were known to take food that people had left on their plates and reheat it. They'd been known to charge double and say, if you don't leave, you're not going to make your train unless you pay. It had become the Wild West out there. And Harvey basically changed all of that and made train travel, when we think about the luxurious cross-country train crossings, it made it a thing. They eventually, I believe it was his son, had a hand in TWA, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, I don't know about that. Okay.
And of course, basically to bring the same principles to the sky. When we think about how flying, used to be a little bit more luxurious, they credit a lot of that to Harvey's son bringing the same principles. Of course, the Harvey girls he hired And it's, again, he was ahead of his time in a lot of ways. And people will say that he only hired single, mostly attractive women to be Harvey girls. But at the same time, this was when none of the women out west even had a hope of getting a job. And so they became their own clique. They were very strict in terms of how the women were to behave and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it really led to all of your modern, what we think of with servers and gratuity and good service. It really, a lot of it can be traced back to Harvey. So you can actually go to one of his original Harvey House restaurant motels there in Petrified Forest. And Petrified Forest is great because it's just one road. You can't get lost. You're not going to argue with your spouse when you make a wrong turn in a national park and your cell phone doesn't work because it's just one road.
These days, I'm usually arguing with Siri or whoever my navigator is. And the book that I wanted to mention that came out recently about Fred Harvey is Appetite for America, Fred Harvey and the Business of Civilizing the Wild West, One Meal at a Time. And I'll put a link to that in the show notes. That's when I first heard about Fred Harvey, was when this book came out in 2011, and someone reviewed it and talked about this largely forgotten episode in American history.
It's well worth a read. It's very, very fascinating. The Petrified Forest really should be considered two national parks because it's the Painted Desert, which if you've traveled through the Badlands, it's that similar erosionary color bands where it's very pretty. You've got the different colors, and then it transforms into these petrified logs, which is a thing. It's almost like it's like you're on the surface of the moon or something. And then as soon as you leave the park and you go into Holbrook, there's all these rock shops that'll sell you the rocks a lot cheaper than you can get them elsewhere. And that's where you also come to the first of the two different wigwam motels that are on Route 66, the one in Holbrook there. Even if you're not staying there, they've got a bunch of old cars in the parking lot to make your pictures look cool. Now, of course, we call it the Wigwam Motel. They are not wigwams, they're teepees.
They are. And the locals did not use teepees, they used wigwams, if I've got it correctly.
The whole thing is, not quite correct, but
right.
That's one of two. The second one is over in San Bernardino. The third one, there's only three that exist now. Third one is outside of Mammoth Cave National Park down here in Kentucky. Two of the three are on Route 66. They're both super fun, very reasonable rates in terms of if you actually wanted to stay in one.
And have you stayed in them? We'll talk about it a little more later, but you actually run tours along Route 66.
I got to be honest, I haven't stayed in one,
okay.
But I've been inside of them. But I have not actually stayed at either of the teepees, wigwam motels. From Holbrook, just up the road a little bit, is Winslow, Arizona, which if you've ever listened to the Eagles a day in your life, you know that you want to go stand on a corner in Winslow, Arizona.
Right.
So they, of course, took that and made it a thing. So there's a corner in Winslow, Arizona that is called Standing on the Corner Park. And they've got a couple statues of Glenn Frey, and they've got a flatbed Ford, I kid you not. And you can get your pictures standing on a corner in Winslow, Arizona. Of course, there's a couple gift shops and a wonderful little coffee and ice cream parlor. They play Eagles nonstop. I asked the people at the stores, I said, do you guys ever get tired of hearing Take It Easy? And they said, we just tune it out at this point, but it's saved our town. While you're there, I also suggest popping into the La Posada Hotel, which again has Harvey connections. It was considered the most opulent hotel in the United States at one point.
Huh.
Sadly, when it ended up being just railroad offices, and so they got rid of all the original furnishings, but they have refurnished it, and it is definitely a wonderful place to kind of stop in and see. They've done a great job restoring it. But Winslow is a prime example of a town that when the railroad came to town, it was boom time, and then the railroad started to dry up. Well, then Route 66 came along, and it was boom time again. And then eventually they started to languish. And something as simple as an Eagles song and somebody with the vision to make that a thing, they've made it a thing again. And so it's cool to see these towns capitalize on their little pieces of history.
Mm-hmm.
From there, you make it on into Flagstaff. Flagstaff, college town, lots to see, lots to do year round. It's high elevation. There's skiing out there in the winter. Most people never think about Arizona having skiing, but they've got great skiing. And then this is where I tell everybody, you're in Flagstaff. How can you not go to the Grand Canyon? You're right there. So, of course, Route 66 didn't go by the Grand Canyon, but
right. Not a bad detour.
Yeah. And then when you come out of there, it shoots you right into Williams. Williams was the last town that the highway actually skipped over. Williams has been able to do really well over the years. They've got lots of campgrounds for Grand Canyon people. They've got the Grand Canyon Scenic Railway that leaves from town and goes, you can take the train ride in.
That gets them a lot of tourism, yeah. I have taken that train.
So Williams stands on its own. It's a great town. They've, just in the past 5 or 6 years, they've really amped up their food and shopping, where they've got a bunch of gift shops and cool diners. It really stands alone as a great place. Headed west, you're going to hit Seligman, which we talked about earlier with the angel of the route.
Mm-hmm.
And Seligman, the best way to describe it is now it's just a series of shops, really. Everybody's got their funky little shop with everything, the tail section of an airplane sticking out, to sometimes there'll be a guy there with a horse that'll just let you sit on his horse and take pictures. And of course, Angel, and then his late brother's drive-in, the Snowcap, is still running, still in existence. And it's stuff that it's hard to explain until you've been there, but it's just nonstop fun, goofy, homemade, bizarre creations.
Okay.
You go towards Kingman. Andy Devine, I believe, was actually married in Kingman. But right before you get there, you go to Hackberry, to the Hackberry General Store, which is just another collection of rusty junk that is so fun. It's hard to explain. They typically have live entertainment, just somebody out there playing some music.
Well, then this is one of those spots where Route 66 and the interstate diverge by more than just a mile or two. They actually rerouted it.
If we're talking scenic driving,
Mm-hmm.
which I know, I'm a car guy.
Mm-hmm.
I know for a lot of you in cars and motorcycles, that's part of the fun. Most of Route 66 is not necessarily super scenic until you get out here. Like you said, coming out of Seligman there, you're going to divert pretty hard from the interstate, and you're going to start to go through these valleys and these deep, deep valleys where there's the only other thing is a set of train tracks that have been there even longer than Route 66. And you really do start to get that southwest scenery that you kind of maybe imagine. And so I will say that the drive from Seligman to Kingman via Route 66, especially if you look at it on a map, it's almost like a big bow
Mm-hmm.
as it kind of goes through the different kind of cliffs and valleys there. So you do get some good twisties, some good driving as you go through there. And then, Kingman's got some museums and some diners as well. And then you have a decision to make. I know a lot of the guided tours at this point, they take off to Vegas, which is fine, but you miss out on a lot. If you go up to Vegas instead of continuing on Route 66, you miss out on Oatman. The reason the big buses don't do it is that they can't make it up the road. The road to Oatman was considered the test of all tests for the people Dust Bowl as they were trying to make it out west.
Oh, I remember reading about that. Yeah, in the Grapes of Wrath.
Yep. If they could make it up the hill to Oatman, it was pretty much downhill the rest of the way towards LA. But that road up to Oatman is a bunch of switchbacks. And still to this day, you can look out and you can see rusted old cars at the bottom. Now, whether or not just people that live in the area go throw their rusty old cars down there to scare people, it's fine. But you get to the little town of Oatman, there's literally wild burros all over town that just walk around everywhere. Great old cafes and bars, and of course it's all haunted. But you miss out on that little town if you can't make it up that hill. And then from there, it's off into kind of the California desert.
Mm-hmm.
You go through Needles, and you go to a place called Amboy, which is where Roy's service station and motel is. And then eventually you're coming into LA, and depending on your patience for LA, you can go through Pasadena and do all the experiences there. The Rose Bowl parade basically goes down Route 66. Goes down, what is that, Colorado Boulevard?
Okay.
Colorado
sounds
Boulevard,
right.
of course, if you've listened to any of the old Jan and Dean songs and Beach Boys and all of your surfer hot rod music, they talk about Colorado Boulevard and the little old lady from Pasadena and all of this American kind of iconic stuff right there. And then eventually, again, you end up down at the Santa Monica Pier. So I know that's a lot, and I apologize for going through it all there. But
That is
it's just a lot
exactly what we wanted you to do. One thing I will say, I wanted to give a shout out to Casey, Illinois, which Casey, Illinois is the place you'd find the world's largest rocking chair apparently today. And it is not on Route 66. It is still in Illinois. As long as we mentioned it earlier, I had bookmarked that to talk about that. We're probably going to wrap it up at this point because this episode is getting long enough. But I want you to pull out a couple of your favorites. If we said the prettiest spot,
I'm going to say that drive from Seligman to Kingman, you really feel like you've stepped back in time.
Okay.
Because there's no interstate anywhere near you. You're just dry. It feels like the West.
Okay.
If you do see a train, you can see the whole train. There's something that feels like the Old West as you drive that part of the route.
Okay. Best diner apple pie on the route.
Ooh, that's going to be the Palms Grill Cafe in Atlanta, Illinois.
I love the fact that there was no hesitation whatsoever.
The biggest challenge to guiding people down Route 66 is that you can only eat so many times a day. And so I have to, I can't tell you how many great diners there are, but I have to give props to Atlanta, Illinois and the Palms Grill Cafe.
Well, and I wanted to talk a little bit about, so you do guided tours, and you've mentioned other people do guided tours in buses. Yours is a self-drive.
Just to hit on it briefly, my whole goal was I found that there were a lot of people that were it in buses, which there's nothing wrong with that, but they wanted to drive. They wanted to actually have the experience of driving on it.
Right.
But doing it by yourself, just as you've heard talking here, there's so much planning. And if you get bogged down and you end up trying to do every little thing, it'd take you a month. So what I wanted to do was come up with something that was a 2-week, about 13-day kind of adventure that you didn't have to buy 50 guidebooks and you didn't have to meticulously plan everything. You just show up and you get to go have fun, but you don't have to worry about, are you on the right alignment? Like what it says, I'm turning onto Route 66 and now I'm turning onto Route 66 again. Here are the places you want to go. Here's where we're going to eat lunch because I know the Palms Grill has the best pie.
Right, exactly.
It was my idea to kind of create a best of road trip that people could just show up with their car. They'd have fun because they wouldn't be by themselves. I love doing road trips by myself, but it can be isolating.
Yep.
And so it's nice to have that camaraderie. You're not around people the whole time, but you get to have some meals and you get to have some fun and have drinks with people and talk about your adventure that day and just kind of a rolling party was what I.
Yeah, so I want people to know about that, and we'll link to that. That's the guided Route66tours.com that we mentioned at the beginning. If somebody was going to do this on their own, because you do this how many times a year?
We're running 2 guaranteed departures this year, possibly 3. So we do it a handful of times.
And so if they're going to do it on their own, and for instance, I don't think you have one in the summer.
Got one in June, one in August, and potentially one in September.
Got it. Okay.
Let me be clear about this, though. I have no problem with the people that want to get in their car and do it by themselves, and that suits them. And if they need help, I'm a resource.
Okay. And that was really going to be the question, is the best resource for somebody who's going to do it by themselves.
Feel free. I've got plenty of articles online on 2-Lane America about Route 66. And then the Facebook groups are great. Route 66 World is going to be your kind of biggest one, I do believe. They'll let you join. Anybody can join that group. And they've got everything from people. I know a lot of people want to do it in RVs.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And that wouldn't necessarily lend itself well to what I'm doing.
Right.
But there's lots of resources on there.
So that's where I'm going to have the debate. If I want to have the debate of who really has the best pie, that's the group to go to.
Yeah, boy, I'm going to make somebody mad by not mentioning their place. But so a lot of your Route 66 business owners are in those Facebook groups. And they're just wonderful. As I mentioned at the start of this, we spent the entire time talking mostly about the places, but it's these business owners that you'll walk away. Like I'm just realizing now I forgot to even talk about Carita Sinclair Station where, he's passed on, but his kids now run it. And literally I show up and they've got coffee and snacks and stuff. I mean, they roll out the red carpet for you. It's just a series of making new friends when you take a trip like this.
Excellent. Well, and we'll put links to The Grapes of Wrath, which you're going to read ahead of time, and the other book that we mentioned. We've got links in the show notes to Austin's 2 websites. And Austin, if you wanted to send people to just one post, if they only had time to read one post about Route 66, what's your favorite?
If I had to talk about some of the posts that I've done on Route 66, I think the one that even if you're not into the old nostalgia, even if you're not into the kind of roadside attractions like I am, I think anyone from any background would love and appreciate the Oklahoma City Memorial. Of course, I've got a post on that. And then, of course, I have to give two more now. I've got one on the Disney Pixar Cars locations. So if you wanted to see how the real life stuff matches up to the movie stuff, that's a really fun article.
So especially if you're going to do it with kids, that would probably be one to point people to. Excellent. Or people like me who just act like kids.
Yeah. I think that going to some of these locations while on, maybe you're going to the Grand Canyon, well, stop here on the way. I don't think doing Chicago to LA as a Route 66 purist trip, like 13 days, your kids are going to hate you because it's just not enough for kids. But in terms of, like I said, hopping off of I-40 just for a minute, you want to be dad or mom of the year driving through the panhandle of Texas, which is like where road trips go to die. And you can hop off and take them to Ramones from the movie Cars and get them a Hot Wheel. I mean, you've really reinvigorated your family. I'd say that Cars post is one that most people would enjoy.
Excellent. Our guest again has been Austin Coop from TulaneAmerica.com, and we also mentioned his other site, guidedroute66tours.com. Austin, thanks so much for coming on Amateur Traveler and talking about a road trip that I want to do, which is Route 66.
Hey, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
In news of the community, I heard from Dave, and he caught me saying something wrong in last week's episode of the Phoenix. And he said that Rawhide, which we mentioned, hasn't been north of Phoenix for years. The land was sold to developers. The buildings were relocated in their entirety to southeast Phoenix, actually on an Indian reservation. Still the same fun atmosphere. And I apologize. I actually double-checked to make sure that Rawhide was still around because I hadn't been there since my kids were young, and they are now 29 and almost 31. So it had been a while, and I made sure it was there. I did not check to see if it was still in the same place. So still something I would recommend for kids, but it's not where I put it. Something that's new is I have another website, and this is another travel website just for travel to California. And so if you're interested in coming to the Golden State, which I happen to like because I've lived here since 1964, except for the time that I spent at college, you can go to californiatravelmedia.com, and you'll find some familiar content there that was moved over from Amateur Traveler. In fact, if you click on those posts at amateurtraveler.com, you'll end up at californiatravelmedia.com. So that's the other way to get there in case you forget. I'd like to ask you a favor. I'm in between contracts right now, and Amateur Traveler doesn't really pay the bills. So if you're booking travel anyway, and you appreciate the Amateur Traveler, if you could go to one of the links on Amateur Traveler under Book Travel or under Deals, it will cost you no more money to book through that link, but will make some money for Amateur Traveler and help support the show. You can also go to shortcuts like amateurtraveler.com/Expedia, amateurtraveler.com/hotels.com, and those will redirect you to an affiliate link that will also support the show. If you can do that, I appreciate it. Thanks. With that, we're going to end this episode of Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. And thanks so much for listening.
I got to see one more cathedral. I got to sit in one more cafe. I know that I should be heading home, but maybe not today.